Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to do something a little bit different than what I usually do. Typically I do end of month wrap up. However, I think I want to start going more in the way of recent reads, where I take about like 5 or 6 of my most recent read books and I talk about them like I would in a wrap up, but doing a more recent reads format is a bit better for me to talk about these books at length without feeling like I have to quickly like get through 10 or 12 books, and it's a much quicker way for me to like update y'all on what I'm currently reading, which is like the whole purpose of this channel is to talk about what I'm currently reading and like your thoughts about that. So I have 6 things to talk about. However, one of those books I did talk about at length in the vlog, and that was Uglies by Scott Westerfeld. I wanted to like go back and reread one of my like personal like childhood favorites. It's part of my nostalgic reads series, so if you want to hear anything about this, go watch that video. I talk a lot about this book, but pretty much I really enjoyed my reread. I think it holds up as far as like YA sci-fi goes. I don't think there's anything quite like this being published right now. That being said, to be fair, I don't read a ton of YA sci-fi. Fantasy is pretty much dominating right now in the YA scene. I think I gave this like a 4.5 to 5-star rating. Okay, let's start with like my most disappointing reads. I had 2 books that I gave like 2.5 ratings, which is really unfortunate. The first one is The Lovely and the Lost by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. Jennifer Lynn Barnes writes a lot of YA mystery thrillers from what I can tell, and she's pretty popular and really well liked. I've heard a few things about some of her other like mystery series. I've heard like for the most part really good things. I thought this was one of her earlier books, but I think this was only published maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. The Lovely and the Lost is a standalone mystery thriller, and we follow a young girl named Kira, and Kira's adoptive family raises search and rescue dogs, and then they like outsource them to like the government or like any kind of agency that needs search and rescue dogs. Kira has like a unique history. When she was very young, like 3 or 4 years old, she was like found in a forest with like no earlier memories of her life, and the team that found her is the team that ends up adopting her. So the woman who found her with her search and rescue dog is now her mother. So the story starts off with her mother's estranged father coming to ask for help. Apparently there's this like little girl who's like lost in the forest. I think this takes place in California. Her adoptive grandfather is asking for their help, and it's a lot of like tense family drama that you can pretty much tell from the get-go is gonna happen. So our main character, her brother, and her neighbor, who also raises a search and rescue dog, and her mother are going off to go find this little girl who's lost in the forest. The reason I gave this a 2.5 star is that it was not enough of a mystery for me to feel like I was like slowly uncovering some sort of truth. Everything kind of just unraveled in the last chapters, and not like in a fun like explosive way. It wasn't thrilling enough for me to like be on my like the edge of my seat the entire time, because while there were parts where they were actually like searching in the forest for this little girl, naturally like the whole search and rescue team is not going to be out in the wilderness for like 24 hours. They're in like, they go in like quadrants or like different teams. So our main character would be searching in the forest for like about 5 hours, and then she get called back. So it's not like I was like it's not this intense like wilderness story either, which is completely fair, but the rest of the story wasn't thrilling either. And the main character was kind of ridiculous. It felt very like CW character writing, which is really unfortunate. I don't mind like CW type writing if I'm in the mood for it, but I felt like the author was trying to like give like a lot of tension and stuff, and it just read really cheesy for me. I mentioned earlier that our main character was like lost in the forest for some time. I guess I didn't catch it at the beginning, but she was lost in the forest when she was like 3 or 4 years old, so she was a toddler. Not a lot of early memories, which is totally fair, but at the end one of the characters mentions like, oh yeah, I mean, you were only lost in the forest for like 3 or 4 weeks, which is super traumatizing. I will give her that. But the entirety of the book, our main character is like the definition of like feral girl, like feral woman raised by wolves. Like that is our character to a T. If you've ever seen that trope, you know what I'm talking about. But she's 16 years old. She acts like a dog. Like at one point, there's this one scene, it kind of made me laugh. Someone asked our main character a question, and instead of responding like yes or no like a normal person, she responds with like pulling back her lips and showing off her teeth like a dog. And I thought it was super funny. But like it's not like she was raised by wolves. She was literally lost in the forest for like 3 or 4 weeks as a child who doesn't really remember much of what happened. So for some reason she's like super feral, and like she's like constantly trying to like refrain herself from like attacking other people. And it's like, you've been in therapy for I don't know how many years, you go to public school, you're 16 now, it's like 10 to 12 years later. Why, like, it doesn't make sense to me character wise that she still acts like she's like she was just picked up from the forest. I don't know, very much, I don't know why she's acting like Balto for like her entire life. It makes no sense to me. It was just very dramatic, and like it read more cheesy than like edgy, I guess. Yeah, it was just very frustrating. A lot of like threads that were introduced were either quickly solved or were just kind of let go because they weren't like the most important questions that were posed, but there were some questions that I was like left like, so what happened with that backstory that we kind of just did away with? I don't get it. So yeah, I gave it like a 2.5 star. It was just very not it for me. The next book that I gave a 2.5 star was Bride of the Shadow King by Sylvia Mercedes. I just finished this one maybe like an hour ago. This one was super disappointing. I just wanted to pick up a really like fun fantasy romance Kindle Unlimited read that I could like knock out in a few hours, and I did go through this pretty quickly. Writing is like pretty straightforward, very like YA, like leaning into new adult type of age range. In this book we follow a young woman. Her name is Farine, and she is the eldest princess or the eldest daughter of a king. However, her father doesn't really like her because of some things that happened in the past, and she now lives in a convent by herself along with the other nuns or whatever. Her father, the king, makes a deal with a shadow king who's essentially like a fae. He's like a type of fae, to marry one of his daughters to the shadow king, and the king specifically wants the shadow king to marry his second daughter. I don't remember her name, but she's supposed to be like the prettiest, the most well-liked, the most like wifely of the daughters that he has. And our main character Farine kind of goes back to her father's castle to like take part in the celebration. On her way from the convent to her father's castle, she actually does run into the Shadow King, and sparks fly. You know, it's a romance, so like they quickly kind of have like an attraction to each other. However, pretty quickly it's like obvious that like they're not supposed to feel attraction to each other, or they're not allowed to, because he's gonna marry her sister, and like that's like the huge like conflict in the story for the most part. There are some like threads of other stuff that seems to be like brewing in the background, but for the most part the main conflict is that our main character, my camera cut off, I don't remember where I was, but I think I was probably talking about how stupid it was that the Fae King can't just marry whichever one of the human princesses that he wants. I don't know why it has to be a specific one. That makes no sense. The marriage is just the contract that they're signing onto. They're both getting something else out of this. The human king wants help protecting his lands, and the Fae King wants human magic to protect his own lands. So like the marriage is just a detail, and like for some reason the Fae King gets it in his head that like the king will betray him if he doesn't marry his like favorite daughter, because he cares about the other daughter more than our main character. So like he's more likely to betray him because it's not like he's holding his favorite daughter hostage or whatever. Like it makes absolutely no sense. Like if the human king is gonna betray you, he's gonna betray you. He doesn't give a fuck about like his daughters that much, like let's be honest. But it's like in the human king's like best interest to like not betray the Fae King, because like I said, he still gets something out of this deal. I hope this makes sense, because it's really stupid. Like when I read the book I was like, this is really stupid. And they hadn't even like signed the contract yet before they're like, yes, I absolutely must marry this princess instead of the one that I really want to, instead of our main character. They hadn't signed a contract yet, so they could have like changed some stuff around. Like I don't know why it was such a big deal that he had to marry one daughter. And also it makes more sense for the king to like not marry off his like best daughter, because that means that he could use her for like another future arrangement, that kind of thing. Like I don't get it. Like I don't get what the whole big deal was that he can't marry the right daughter or whatever. It was so frustrating and so stupid. That was pretty much the first half of the book. The second half of the book there was like a whole like fake bride thing going on. I won't go too much detail because I might spoil the book, but like I personally don't care if I spoil the book, because I don't think you're really missing out on much. But I won't spoil the book just because I won't. The second half of the book just kind of like drags on this whole like our main character can't be with the Fae King, so there's a lot of like lies and deception. A whole bunch of other stuff happens. It was like really like not well done. Like the whole conflict centers on some stupid technicality. Like I don't get, like it's bad. Like the book is bad. So yeah. The next book I picked up just so I can have something to listen to when I did like chores or cooked, that kind of thing, and that is The Devil of the Highlands by Lyndsay. This is a like historical fiction romance between a young English woman and some Scottish laird. Our main character's like evil stepmother character is basically like marrying her off to like this Scotsman who's like has a reputation of being like really cruel and stuff. And so obviously our main character's like, I don't want to marry like someone who could like beat me for the rest of my life, but she kind of has to because the king like signed off on it or something. I don't really know like the politics of it all, but yeah, so our main character has to marry this Scottish laird and then go live in Scotland with him. It's historical fiction, like it's just the romance that is like at the heart of it. There's a little bit of like a little mystery in the latter half of the book, which Lyndsay Sands does tend to put a little bit of like outside conflict into the romance, which I personally like more, because a lot of time the internal conflict or the conflict between the two people in the couple is like really contrived and like miscommunication and that kind of thing. At least this one, the conflict between the two people is not like miscommunication. It's like literally outside forces trying to hurt their relationship, so that makes more sense and it's not like annoyingly frustrating. So yeah, I gave this 3 stars. I don't know if I should elaborate on this. If you've read like one historical fiction romance and you kind of not read them all, that's kind of rude, but like, you know, like the format, you know, that kind of thing. It wasn't like fantastic, but it wasn't terrible. It was a fine narrative, a fine story. So the next book that I picked up was a book from Kathryn Moon. I read one of Kathryn Moon's books last year, if I remember correctly, and I absolutely loved it. It was so like fun, like the fun romance that I like yearn for. A lot of times romances are just like okay, and they're not bad, but it's like whatever, like the last book I talked about. But Kathryn Moon's were like actually like exciting and fun, and like I was having like a good time reading through it. So I wanted to pick up another one of her works, and this one was also very fun and very like entertaining, like much more than the usual romances that I pick up, and that was Lola and the Millionaires. This is a Kindle Unlimited romance that again I picked up because it had Kathryn Moon's name on it. This is a reverse harem. What I did not know about this book going in is that it's an ABO work, which is a subgenre of like erotic fiction, which that is like not my thing. That's never been my thing. If you're familiar with ABO, you know that it has its roots in like fan fiction type writing. I read a lot of fan fiction when I was younger, specifically on LiveJournal, and then that translated into fan fiction, and then eventually I moved over to AO3. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then this whole section is going to go over your head. Sorry. ABO was a subgenre that I knew of, but I like purposely avoided for quite some time because I thought it had its roots in like cringe. It seemed very cringy to me, so I kind of avoided it until now because I didn't know that this book was ABO fiction. I don't know how to explain this because it's like really strange, and it's still strange to me, especially when I say it out loud, but ABO is a subgenre of erotic fiction which introduces this idea of like, I guess you can call it like a second gender where there's alphas, betas, omegas. Doesn't necessarily have to be like wolf or werewolf shifting. I thought that was like inherent to ABOs, but apparently it's not. There's no werewolves or anything in this book. Normal people doing normal things, but everyone in this book kind of falls into one of these categories: alphas, betas, omegas. They have different traits that are associated with those. Women and men can both be alphas, betas, or omegas. It's this whole thing. You should look it up yourself because I don't want to describe anything more because it's like, it is kind of cringy, but I thought the book was fine. Anyways, the book was really fun. It was really entertaining. When I first started reading some of this stuff, a lot of the terms went over my head. I had to Google a lot to understand what was going on because I'm not familiar with this subgenre. I haven't even explained like the plot of this. In this book, we follow a young girl named Lola, and she's kind of down on her luck, and her cousin manages to get her a job at a very like exclusive, like very she type magazine as like a creative director type stuff, like art director, that kind of thing. And she meets a bunch of wealthy men. That's about it. That's the romance. It was very fun and entertaining. Like I said before, Kathryn Moon kind of hits it out of the park when it comes to I've never read ABO, but she kind of hits it out of the park when it comes to like reverse harem, despite me not knowing what the fuck ABO was, because I have prided myself on like ignoring this subgenre for years, and now like I finally took part in it, and I feel like a part of my shield has broken, if you will. And the best book I read for this recent reads wrap up is Siren Queen by Nghi. This was an arc from the publisher, I believe it was Tor.com Publishing, so thank you so much for this arc. This book takes place in pre-code Hollywood, so before 1934, and we follow a Chinese American girl named Lola. And Lola really wants to be famous. She wants nothing more than to see herself on the big screen and people like cheering her name and being like the like Chinese American it girl actress for the time. We know that Hollywood itself is a very predatory like industry for young women in general, women of color. Lulu's also a queer woman. I don't remember her ever having any attraction to men in this book. I'm pretty sure she's only ever been attracted to women as far as I could see. Yeah, we know that Hollywood does not treat women very nicely, but what Nevo does is that she also injects like actual monsters into this story, so it is fantasy. However, it's very like light fantasy. There is no magic system to speak of. Characters just like do things on a whim. The author doesn't feel the need to explain anything, so if that's not your type of fantasy, then you might have issues with it. Like there's one scene where Lulu's mother like creates living dolls. She just does it and there's no explanation given. We kind of just roll with it. That kind of fantasy. I really enjoyed this as far as like the story, how it went, and the character growth, but the writing is something that I personally struggled with because it's not my thing. She has a very unique writing style, and it's very stylized and very like purple at sometimes. If that is not your thing, then you really probably should avoid this book. I would implore you to like look at like excerpts of this book. I think like Google Books or Amazon, like I think you can actually like look into the book and see like the type of writing that it has, because yeah, this is very unique writing. It's not straightforward at all. I would even say that some parts, like if I didn't know for sure like this was like absolutely like a fantasy book, I would assume it's magical realism, because some parts I was like, is this supposed to be like real? Is this supposed to be just like a metaphor? Like I can't really tell, but like I know that this is fantasy, but it reads like a magical realism, like surrealist type book. It's not very like direct, so keep that in mind if you want to pick this up. But the story for sure, like it really, I love the story. Lily is probably one of those characters that I'll probably think of going forward, like every now and then, like that story that kind of sticks with you. She's incredibly ambitious. I love ambitious characters. I especially love ambitious women. This is definitely one of the stories that sticks with you, and I feel like it's also that type of story that upon reading it you're like, well, that was very good, that's fine, but I feel like it hits more the longer that you're away from the story, if that kind of makes sense. I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4-star because again, the writing was a little bit hard for me to get used to. It's not my type of writing. If I knew that going forward, that I probably wouldn't have consciously picked it up, but I did, because the journey that our character goes through is top tier. Those are the most recent reads that I picked up, so let me know in the comments if you've read any of these, if you've enjoyed any of these, if I put some of these on your radar, if I've like dissuaded you from picking up some of these. I'd like to hear anything you have to say in the comments down below. I will also link my social medias down below, as well as some far more important links. Feel free to like, dislike, comment, or subscribe, or do neither. It's all cool with me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.